Hi, I am Yartami. This man controlled 90% of America's oil, and when the government shattered his empire to stop him, he actually became richer. This is the story of John D. Rockefeller, the most hated businessman, who became the world's first billionaire. To understand how he built a fortune that defies human comprehension, we have to look at the system he created. It was a machine designed to swallow every competitor in its path. John Davidson Rockefeller was born into poverty on July 8, 1839, in Richford, New York. His mother, Eliza, was a devout Baptist who believed in honesty, hard work, and the strict rules of her faith. His father, William, was the complete opposite. Known as Devil Bill, he was a con artist and a phantom who masqueraded as a traveling salesman to mask a darker reality. Bill sold colored water as cancer cures to the dying and posed as a deaf beggar to eavesdrop on farmers just to swindle them later. He treated his own family the same way, famously saying that he cheated his boys every chance he got to make them sharp. One day, he told young John to jump from a high chair, promising to catch him, only to step back and let the boy crash into the floorboards. He told his son never to trust anyone completely, not even him. This was John's entire education. Trust is weakness, and the world is a battlefield where you are either the predator or the prey. In 1849, Devil Bill fled to Canada after being accused of sexual assault, leaving his family penniless. At 16 years old, John became the man of the house. He was quiet, intense, and obsessed with the one thing that never lied: numbers. He enrolled in a 3-month bookkeeping course, and then landed a job as an assistant bookkeeper in Cleveland, earning only 50 cents a day. He was meticulous to the point of neurosis, recording every single penny he made or spent in a small red book he called Ledger A. He celebrated September 26th as Job Day for the rest of his life, considering it more important than his own birthday because it represented his independence from his father. By age 20, John had saved $800. To enter the world of real business, he needed more. So he did something that probably killed him inside. He asked his father for money. Devil Bill agreed to lend him $1,000, but he charged his own son 10% interest and warned him he might demand it back at any moment, just to keep him sharp. John didn't argue. He took the money and formed a partnership with Morris Clark, selling produce like beans, pork, and oats. It was safe and steady work, but John was dreaming of something much bigger. In 1859, the Pennsylvania oil strike happened, and the world was suddenly drowning in black gold. Cleveland became the refinery central of the nation. While Morris Clark thought the oil business was a dangerous gamble, Rockefeller saw a massive opportunity. He believed that while people would always need to eat, they would also always need to see in the dark. He believed oil was the light. Against Clark's judgment, they took on a chemist named Samuel Andrews and built a refinery. The tension between the partners grew as Rockefeller wanted to borrow aggressively to expand, while Clark was terrified of debt. By 1865, they reached a breaking point and decided to dissolve the company through a private auction. The bidding started low, but quickly climbed. Clark couldn't imagine a 25-year-old having the stomach to go higher than $50,000. When Rockefeller bid $72,500, the room went dead silent. Clark realized Rockefeller would bid until he was bankrupt or dead. Rockefeller won, shook Clark's hand, and later said that was the day that determined his career. Now the master of his own company, John renamed it Rockefeller and Andrews. He began to apply the ledger, a mindset, to the dirty world of oil. At the time, refining was incredibly wasteful. Most refiners only wanted kerosene for lamps and would dump the waste, gasoline, naphtha, and tar, straight into the river. Rockefeller looked at that river and saw money disappearing. He found ways to turn that refinery sludge into lubricating oil and paraffin wax. He didn't stop there. He bought his own forests to make his own barrels and built his own kilns to dry the wood. By cutting out every middleman, he could sell his oil cheaper than anyone else and still make a profit. By age 30, the bookkeeper had done it. He owned the largest refinery in Cleveland, the oil capital of the world. But he didn't look at his success. He looked at his surroundings and saw hundreds of small, inefficient refineries competing for scraps. To Rockefeller, These weren't rivals to be respected. They were a mess that was ruining the industry. He decided to take those broken pieces and forge them into one. On January 10, 1870, John D. Rockefeller and his associates officially incorporated the Standard Oil Company. He was building a machine designed to swallow every competitor. To do it, he didn't look at the oil wells, he looked at the railroads, the veins of the nation. Railroads were in a death spiral, slashing rates to steal business from each other. Rockefeller walked into the offices of the railroad kings and guaranteed them 60 carloads of oil every single day in exchange for a secret partnership. This was the South Improvement Company, or SIC. It was a shell company designed to act as a cartel between the biggest refiners and the railroads. The SIC had 3 ruthless pillars. First was the rebate. Rockefeller got a massive discount on every barrel he shipped. Second was the spy network. The railroads gave John detailed reports on his rivals, including where they were shipping and at what price. The third was the kill shot, known as the drawback. Every time a competitor shipped a barrel of oil, the railroad took a portion of that competitor's money and handed it directly to Rockefeller. It was brilliant, and at the time it was legal. He would invite a competitor to his office and lay out a simple proposal. He would show them that he was being paid for every barrel they shipped, and tell them they would go bankrupt if they stayed in the game. He offered to buy them for Standard Oil stock or cash, telling them their only other choice was to be crushed. Between February and March 1872, this reached a peak known as the Cleveland Massacre. In one 48-hour window, he swallowed 6 refineries one by one. In less than 3 months, 22 of the 26 refineries in Cleveland had surrendered. When the secret leaked and the public exploded in late March, the pressure was so intense that the Pennsylvania legislature revoked the SIC charter. The public thought they had won, but Rockefeller didn't care. By the time they killed the deal, he already owned Cleveland. He then began to look at the map of America like a general planning total war. He invented the blueprint for every monopoly in history: vertical integration. If a rival in another state refused to sell, he cut off their oxygen. He bought the companies that made the white oak barrels, the warehouses, and the chemical plants that produced the acid needed for refining. Competitors soon found that even if they could refine oil, they couldn't find a barrel to put it in or a chemical to treat it with. There was one final obstacle: the independent pipeline. Pennsylvania oilmen began building a 110-mile pipeline to pump oil directly to the coast, bypassing Rockefeller's railroads. Rockefeller's response was scorched earth. He bought strips of land across the pipeline's path to halt construction with lawsuits. When that didn't work, his teams sabotaged lines and bribed local officials to pull permits. By the time the pipeline was finished, the independent companies were exhausted and bankrupt. Rockefeller walked in and bought the pipeline for pennies. By 1879, he sat atop 90% of the entire industry. He had consolidated the chaos and won the great game. But owning 90% of the world meant he had a massive target on his back. Standard Oil was a sprawling web of dozens of companies across multiple states. At the time, American law said a company in Ohio wasn't allowed to own stock in a company in Pennsylvania. His empire was a giant, held together by secret handshakes and verbal agreements. It was fragile. To solve this, Rockefeller's lawyers invented the trust. On January 2, 1882, they pulled the stock of 40 different companies into one single massive entity controlled by 9 trustees. It was a legal shell game. If a regulator asked who owned a refinery in New York, the answer was a maze of paperwork that led nowhere. From his office in New York, known as the Temple, Rockefeller was optimizing the world. He was famously obsessed with the last drop, once ordering a factory to use exactly 39 drops of solder to seal a kerosene tin because 40 was a waste and 38 leaked. His vision went far beyond American shores. He flooded the markets of Asia with iconic blue 5-gallon tins. In China, he gave away millions of small kerosene lamps for free. He knew that if you give a man a lamp, you own his nights, because to keep the light burning, that man had to buy Rockefeller's oil for the rest of his life. He drove the price of kerosene down from 30 cents a gallon to just 8 cents. For the first time in human history, the poor could afford to stay awake after sunset. By the 1890s, he was worth over $900 million, roughly 1.5% of the entire American economy. But while the numbers were growing, the man began to wither. Success was eating him from the inside out. Rockefeller developed alopecia, and his hair fell out in clumps. He became a ghostly figure, eventually forced to wear a rotating set of wigs to mimic natural hair growth. He lived on a diet of crackers and milk because his nerves had destroyed his digestion. While he was hiding in his temple, a new kind of enemy was ready to reveal his secrets. In 1902, a journalist named Ida Tarbell began an investigation. Her father had been an independent oil man whose business was squeezed to death by the Standard Oil anaconda. For 2 years, she hunted for proof that the trust existed. She unearthed secret contracts and mapped the rebates, drawbacks, and spy networks. Then the investigation took a scandalous turn. The public learned that John was the son of a wanted criminal, Devil Bill, who was living a double life under a fake name. The mask of the deacon was ripped away. Tarbell's book, The History of the Standard Oil Company, became the most dangerous book in America. It gave the public a face to hate and gave President Theodore Roosevelt the ammunition he needed. Roosevelt launched a scorched earth antitrust investigation that wound through the courts for years. On May 15, 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court delivered the final blow. They declared Standard Oil an unreasonable monopoly and ordered the trust to be shattered into 34 separate pieces. The world believed Rockefeller had finally lost. But when the monopoly was broken up, he didn't lose his ownership. He simply saw it decentralized. He still held a massive share of stock in all 34 new companies, which eventually grew into global powers like ExxonMobil and Chevron. As the world transitioned from kerosene lamps to the gasoline age, the value of those individual stocks skyrocketed. In 1916, John D. Rockefeller became the world's first confirmed billionaire. As the gold piled up, the old man realized his time was running out. He hired the world's first PR experts to scrub the Standard Oil blood from his name. He appeared in public as a kindly grandfather, handing out shiny new dimes to children. He founded the University of Chicago and the Rockefeller Foundation, funding research that eradicated hookworm and yellow fever. On May 23, 1937, the machine finally stopped. Rockefeller died at the age of 97. He had made money on a margin so large it defies human comprehension. He believed the power to make money was a gift from God, and that it was his duty to use it for the good of his fellow man. Whether he was a hero or a villain, his legacy remains as complex as the system he built. He proved that with obsession and a ruthless focus on the numbers, a bookkeeper could become the man who owned the light. Rockefeller's secret was that he didn't just build a business, he built a system that became more valuable the more people tried to break it. In the end, the world's first billionaire showed us that while empires can be destroyed, the ownership of the future is the only thing that truly lasts.